Villalpando. Councilmember Juan Castillo. Councilmember Marta Gonzalez.
Present.
Councilmember Lorena Delgadillo.
Present.
Mayor, you have a quorum.
Thank you. We have one item, presentation related to proposed changes to the Somerton zoning and subdivision ordinances.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. Saul Albor, Community Development Director. Mayor and Council, this item before you, this presentation is an update on our ongoing effort to update the zoning and subdivision ordinances. The effort to update this began a while back, and we've made progress. We've made a lot of advances in this, and it's important to keep these codes current. So therefore, we're entering the final stage of the update. So I prepared a presentation before you, and I'm going to try to go as fast but thorough as possible because there's a lot of ground to cover. So with that being said, Andrea, could you scroll down all the way down to the PowerPoint, or what looks like a PowerPoint? Should be like page 300, perhaps.
We're gonna say you first 300.
Okay, we'll go back. All right, there. So this is a presentation. We still have many opportunities to make edits on the zoning and subdivision codes, but tonight is the significant changes presentation. As you saw, there's 300 pages of code, so I'll save you the trouble of reading it and just go straight to the significant updates, significant changes. So a little bit of an overview. The zoning code was last updated in 2015. And an update of the zoning and subdivision code usually follows the general plan update. Our general plan was updated in 2020, so the zoning code is up next. As a refresher, the general plan is the vision of the city. It's the vision, but the zoning code is the law. The zoning and subdivision codes are a code which is enforceable, and the general plan is a vision. Our effort to update the code began in mid-2022, and I'll show you a timeline right now. But something to keep in mind with this code update is that this is a strategic update and not a total overhaul. We're not reinventing the whole code. It's a good code. What we have, it's a good foundation to go off. But the updates that are being proposed are reflective of local and regional trends, as well as state legislative changes. Here are some of the project milestones. As I mentioned, we began all the way back in July of 2022. And right now we are all the way down there well, actually past July 2024. But as you can see on that timeline, we've had quite a bit of back and forth with the consultant. The consultant had some issues on their end, which is why this has taken longer than we would have hoped. But we've worked through them. We've worked with the consultant to try to really get this wrapped up this year, this calendar year. And we are on track for that. If you go to the next slide, Andrea. As we keep moving through the process, the formal adoption process is as shown. We are on the second date, the August 6th, the public significant review session with a city council. Following this meeting, we're going to have a citizen review meeting on the 19th with the Planning and Zoning Commission, followed by a formal public hearing with Planning and Zoning Commission on September 16th, and hopefully get this to you for adoption in October. So that's the timeline that we're looking at for this. And as I mentioned, there's still plenty of time to make changes to anything that you see fit in here. This is a spine, I guess the outline of the zoning ordinance. There are 10 sections, and everything in red is where there are significant changes. In the black sections, there are no significant changes. So I'm just going to go one by one, and you can pause me at any one that you have any questions on. So the first section is section 2, zoning districts. You keep going, Andrea, please. Section 2, zoning districts. These are the significant changes. Number 1, public schools proposed to be permitted by right in the government zoning district. They are currently conditional. Even, for example, the high school, when they rezone their land to government district, they still have to obtain a conditional use permit. We are proposing it to be by right if you're in the government district, because the government district that is the intent of the government district for government buildings. So that's one of the changes proposed. The second one is for single family detached, so a regular house, and duplex uses proposed to be permitted by right in the R2 zoning district. They currently require a plan development overlay. This is just to add a degree of flexibility for developers to have a mix of uses, duplexes and single family residential in the R2 district without having to do a plan development overlay. It just eliminates an extra step because R2 is compatible with both single family and duplex. Number 3, the proposed codification of practice of adhering to recorded subdivision setbacks instead of the current prescribed setback of zoning district for any construction project. So basically what that one says is if the current code calls for a 7-foot setback, the current code, but yet that subdivision plat was approved at a time when the setback was 5 feet and every other house in that subdivision is at 5 feet, you would be permitted to follow the recorded setbacks versus the current setbacks. This is an issue that we run into a lot. So that's one of the changes we're proposing. Number 4 is the proposed addition of architectural shingles, 30-year roofs or 30-year shingles to the allowed roofing materials list for new residential projects. Right now, we're only at tile roof. That is the only permitted roofing material permitted in Somerton, and it's worked on for aesthetic purposes. It does look really nice. However, architectural shingles also can accomplish the aesthetic look that we're going for. They look really nice. This isn't your flat shingle that literally looks like a piece of asphalt with pebbles. No, these are thicker. They're designed to last longer. So we're proposing to add architectural shingles as a permitted roofing material. The next one is to allow chain link fencing in the light industrial zoning district when not located adjacent to residential, MSC, or commercial. Right now, we don't allow chain link fence at all. But for example, in the case of the Del Sol warehouse, completely surrounded by ag and light industrial uses, perhaps chain link could be compatible in those areas, but not when they're located in the middle of the city. So that's just another being more flexible with industrial development. And number 6 is the proposed reduction of minimum usable open space requirement for plan development overlays from 20% to 10%. A plan development overlay is a type of zoning that a developer can pursue. We are proposing to drop that from 20% to 10%. And the reason being is that no one has ever applied for a plan development overlay for the sole reason of the 20% requirement. A 20% just eliminates a big chunk of developable land and makes the project unfeasible. So these are the proposed changes in section 2, zoning districts. Any questions on any of them?
Any questions or comments? Under public schools, are charter public schools also included with that, or is it different? Do we need to further specify that?
Mayor, currently the code, our code classifies public schools and private schools. I would have to see if charter schools falls into any one of those definitions, but is your preference that charter schools be permitted by right, or would those be conditional?
CUP conditional, yeah.
So because private, we're proposing to be remain as conditional. So I'll check the definitions,
Okay.
and if not, we can include charter schools to be conditional as well.
The other thing, do you have a picture of those architectural shingles?
I do not as part of this presentation, but Andrea, if you open Google, we can.
Yeah, and if you're gonna make this presentation, make sure to have a picture so I think residents or stakeholders know.
For sure, Mayor. At the next meeting, we'll have examples. Would you like to see it right now, though, in Google?
Yeah.
So just Google 30-year architectural shingles. No, 30-year architectural shingles. Oh, those are just samples. Click on images. So as you can tell in some of the images, they have a little bit more depth to them. They're not as the other ones, the shingles that most people are used to seeing, those are what is known as the 20-year shingle. That's the very thin, very they have less thickness. So this is a very popular option. And then there's another benefit to shingles, not to spend too much time on this, but there are some roof pitches where you cannot do tile because of the pitch. When the roof gets to be a certain pitch, you can't, tile doesn't make sense. So this is a very good option for that.
Other questions or comments?
Just a question. So let's say we have a subdivision, one house can be shingles, the other house can be tile, shingles, tile, they can do that?
Councilmember, if that is, if it's a subdivision that's not being developed by one single developer, that they have their patterns established, under the current code, that would be allowed. Oh, sorry, under the code with the following these amendments. So it would be tile roof and 30-year shingles, but not the 20-year, not the cheap, thin one. Any other questions or comments on section 2?
Go ahead.
Thank you. Moving on, this is section 3, supplemental use standards. This gets into a little bit more technical stuff. Number 1 is the required changes to group home siting regulations due to state legislation. This is a recommendation by the consultant. It waives the 1,200-foot minimum distance from one group home to another if they can prove disability accommodation provision. So this is more of a state requirement than anything. This is just following what the state has already adopted. Number 2 is a proposed elimination of arterial or collector roadway access requirement for religious assembly uses. So right now for a church, you have to access for new churches either from a collector or an arterial roadway. But there are instances in which churches can be accessed from local roadways. We have every single church, I would say, in Somerton, except for the ones here on Main Street and the one on Cesar Chavez, accessible from a local roadway. So we just want to be a little bit more flexible there. Number 3 is requirement, sorry, to mobile food vendor licensing requirement due to state legislation change. Mobile food vendor siting permit is eliminated. Mobile food vendors to be permitted by right in the C1, C2, and MSC zoning districts. So there's a lot of changes at the state level for mobile food vendors. This is one of those requirements that we're just following to reflect the new changes. What it says is that you can't impose any additional regulation on a mobile food vendor that you would impose on a regular business. So by eliminating these requirements, that we're following that. And then also we're expanding. Right now, mobile food vendors are only allowed in the C2 and MSC district. We're adding C1 as an allowed zoning district. So for example, at where the sushi house is at, a mobile food vendor could set up there. Number 4 is the proposed elimination of traffic impact study for gas stations and service stations to be determined by trips generated method per city of Yuma and Yuma County engineering standards. We're also proposing to create a section for mobile vendors, so not just mobile food vendors, but for mobile vendors of any kind with similar provisions to mobile food vendors. Number 6, proposed reduction of minimum distance between primary buildings and accessory buildings from 10 feet to 5 feet. Number 7, proposed elimination of minimum lot size for accessory dwelling units, currently 8,000 square feet. ADUs will still be regulated by lot coverage and setbacks. ADU shall not exceed more than 50% of the primary dwelling area or exceed the height of the primary building. So this is a big one, this number 7. Right now, if you want to have an accessory dwelling unit, you need to have a lot of 8,000 square feet. Very few people have a lot 8,000 square feet or larger. However, there's a lot of smaller lots in the 6,000 to 7,000 range that have plenty of room to build an accessory dwelling unit. However, they can't because they don't meet that arbitrary 8,000 square foot minimum. So this changes that. This would allow accessory dwelling units in lots of any size as long as you meet setbacks and lot coverage, basically is what that's saying. And number 8 is proposed addition of regulation to allow ADUs to be used as rental units, owner required to occupy either primary dwelling or ADU. This is strictly to increase the housing stock in Somerton, to allow those ADUs to be used as rentals. This is something that we are seeing throughout the state become quite popular. City of Yuma is following this as well. Any questions on section 3 updates?
Any questions or comments? On that first one, the 1,200-foot minimum distance, so now there's no distance, so it can be someone can buy homes in a subdivision and have group homes?
There's a certain, they have to prove a disability accommodation. So I believe what it's, I believe what it is that they can prove that it's for disabled occupants, or if they meet a minimum criteria, they can get a waiver. Not every single group home will qualify for that waiver though. They have to prove eligibility and then they get that waiver required. I can look up the exact, what the
Yeah.
criteria is, and I can share it with the entire council.
Okay.
But that is just something that the state is requiring.
Yeah,
That's
we
not
we need to
something,
make sure that, you know, whatever the state allows, we do, but we don't make it less stringent, because, yeah,
right.
there's been a lot of concerns, and the state allows it, so be it, but yeah,
No, we'll make
we
sure of
hear
that,
it,
Mayor.
and
And I'll share that criteria with you.
Okay.
Moving on to section 4, general development regulations. This talks about more development standards. Number 1 is proposed modification of parking requirement calculation for multifamily development. Reduction from 1.5 required spaces to 1 space for 1-bedroom units. This is just a recommendation from the consultant on what they're seeing statewide. Is there's a different calculation method now on how parking is calculated. A lot of cities in the past over required parking, but this is a more contemporary requirement. So that's number 1. So currently it's 1.5 spaces per 1-bedroom unit. So it's going down to 1 as proposed. Number 2 is a proposed addition of parking requirement calculation of 0.5 spaces per guest parking, per unit for guest parking. So we're dropping the requirement from 1.5 to 1, but we're also including now for a 0.5 for guests. So it considers that apartments don't only house people, but they also receive guests and visitors, and that's the reality. So this is it's a little bit more tailored for that now. And that was a consultant's recommendation. Number 3 is a proposed reduction of parking requirement for industrial warehouse uses from 1 space per 1,000 gross square feet of gross floor area to 1 space per 4,000 square feet gross floor area. The one that comes to mind is Del Sol. It was a 50,000 square foot warehouse, and the code, I believe, asks close to 50 parking spaces, but yet they only have 12 employees there at any given time. So that's one of those instances where we thought industrial use is okay. Let's take a closer look at this next code update. This is a very, I think, still good number for requiring. Instead of 1,000, 1 space per 1,000, it's 1 space per 4,000. So a 75% reduction. And that's still more than I believe Yuma County would require of an industrial warehouse. So we're still there where we need to be. Number 4 is a proposed minimum parking space width from 8.5 to 9. I think we're the only municipality that has an 8.5 minimum, and we're just trying to be more in line with the rest of the county. 9 feet minimum parking width. Number 5 is the addition of a regulation to allow a secondary driveway on multi-frontage residential lots. So if you have a corner lot, and if you don't have a non-access easement, you could have a second driveway. Take advantage of that. Right now, that's not allowed. And number 6 is the proposed addition of regulation to allow parking of recreational vehicles, trailers, toy haulers, boats, fifth wheels on paved areas adjacent to the driveway, currently prohibited but rarely enforced. So this is talking about in your driveway. Right now, the code says that you can't park a trailer there, or your mobile home there, or a toy hauler or whatnot. You also cannot park it in the space next to the driveway, which everyone does. And this is just us being realistic. People, not everyone can afford to go put them in storage, and it's something that the community requests. However, we would still not allow encroachment onto the sidewalk. So if you have this 40 foot RV that projects onto the sidewalk, we would still enforce that. But in most instances, they would be allowed to be stored in the front setback, properly accommodated there on paved areas. So if you want to put it in the side, if you don't have a concrete driveway, you could extend your concrete and park it right there. Number 7 is the proposed addition of a regulation to entice ride sharing, Uber, Lyft loading areas in exchange for up to a 10% reduction of parking space requirement. This is one that's being used in Phoenix. So if you provide Uber and Lyft pickup areas, dedicated pickup areas, you can qualify for a 10% reduction of parking. It's not real popular here yet. I mean, you have to wait quite a bit for an Uber, but eventually we'll get there and we'll be future proof. Number 8 is the proposed increase in maximum wall height from 6 feet to 7 feet. The International Residential Code allows for walls, talking about block walls, to be up to 7 feet. But our zoning code allows up to 6 feet. So we're giving people that extra foot there with that. Number 9 is proposed modification of permitted wall materials to allow steel tubing, vinyl paneling, and other similar solid materials, as wall materials will not apply to subdivision perimeter walls. So right now, block wall is the only permitted fencing and wall material in Somerton. This is a request from the community that we get a lot. What other material can we use? Chain link, we know is something the community is not really in the vision of the city for chain link, but there are instances such as where steel tubing or other alternative wall materials that are solid and durable could be applied and still achieve that aesthetic element that we're looking for. But this would only be for interior lots, standalone lots, not for subdivisions. For subdivision perimeters, you would still need to be block wall. Number 10 is a proposed modification of wall regulations, eliminating engineer requirement for walls less than 8 feet in height. Right now, we have it in writing that anything over 6 feet, it has to be engineered, but this would replace that provision and say anything less than 8 feet does not have to be engineered. So the 7-foot wall, for example, would not have to be engineered. Any questions on section 4?
Questions or comments? There's none.
Thank you. Number 5, administration. We are proposing to change the minor modification procedure. The minor modification is what is also known as the minor variance. In other cities, minor modification approval to be determined by the zoning administrator or the community development director instead of minor modification committee. Right now, the committee is made up of a couple individuals from Public Works, Fire Department, and Community Development, and it's the person who applies for it has to go get signatures, pay a fee, and it's an administrative process, but it is a process. So this would make it a little bit simpler. It would be an administrative minor modification, which leads me to my next point. Required change to minor modification powers. Deviation permitted through minor modification to be reduced from 20% to 10%. So right now, a minor modification, aka the minor variance, you get a 20% reduction. This is a recommendation from the consultant in the ARS. It allows for a minor deviation of the code up to 10%. 20% is, we're kind of pushing it. We've never been challenged on it. Other cities still have it at 20%. They've never been challenged on it, but to be more compliant with the Arizona revised statutes, the recommendation is to drop it from 20% to 10%, but also making the approval process simpler.
20% or 10% of what? Of lot coverage or?
Oh, this is, oh, sorry, Mayor. A minor modification is a minor variance for anything. It can be, for example, any kind of development standard, setback, lot coverage, parking requirement, height.
So it's usually a measurable.
It's a measurable requirement.
Modification.
Yes.
So it would be a 10%.
10% instead of 20. Because otherwise it has to be a variance. And that one is the one that goes before council, but the minor modification currently is done administratively, but it's up to 20, but it's being proposed to be dropped to 10%. That was the recommendation from the consultant, again, just to be more compliant with the Arizona revised statutes. Number 3 is a proposed change to temporary use permit procedures, approval to be determined by the Planning and Zoning Commission instead of zoning administrator. So right now, a temporary use permit is approved by the Community Development Director. We're proposing to change that to be approved by the Planning and Zoning Commission.
And why is that?
They can, some of them, Mayor, some of them can be technical. They're more, some of them right now under the administrative process, it doesn't allow the public to comment on them. There is no notification. But with the planning and zoning procedure process, there is a opportunity for the public to have a opinion on these.
So what are some examples of temporary use permit that you've gotten over the last 5 years?
The most recent one, Mayor, is, for example, Housing America wanting to build a temporary offsite sign on a property on Main Street. That's the most recent one. We got a temporary use permit application for a parking lot here for Sunset on a dirt lot. Those are the most recent ones. Those were just this year.
So is it temporary use, we're gonna add more time because it's not permanent, so.
No.
So we would have to wait for a planning and zoning commission meeting, so usually if they need something, it's something that they need right away. I don't know, just for me, my concern is just adding more red tape and sending it instead of having maybe specify certain uses or certain types of temporary use permit that can be allowed by the planning and zoning director or zoning administrator, but maybe identify those instances where there's a feeling that it needs to go to the commission. But if it's temporary use permit, it should be more of a.
Mayor, this one wasn't a recommendation by the consultant. This is staff generated a recommendation, and we have no problem of keeping it as is if that's your wish. If you just to eliminate the red tape and
at least
keep it simple.
that's what I feel, but I don't know the rest of council. But I feel since it's temporary, we get those like sign, that we had recently I think a sign request over there on Parkview, so stuff like that instead of sending it to a commission.
that one was slightly different. That one that you mentioned,
Yeah.
the Parkview one, yes, but I see your point, Mayor.
Yes.
So for the going forward, if it's council's direction, we can remove that last provision there and keep the temporary use process as is in place. Very good. Section 6, zoning procedures and fees. So number 1 is a double from the previous section, so just ignore number 1. This is one I'm really excited about. Number 2, proposed addition of regulation that allows a non-registered building designer to design commercial/industrial buildings under 3,000 square feet and has an occupant load of less than 20 people. It says not yet shown in draft because in the 300 pages that I attached as well, the text for this is not included in there, but it was added in the latest revision. This is actually already in the Arizona Revised Statutes. There is an exception there that allows a non-registered building designer, so a drafter that's not an architect or an engineer, to design non-residential buildings under 3,000 square feet with occupant loads of less than 20 people. In the past, this is something that I wanted to implement immediately because I think there's only so many architects and engineers in the city in Yuma County, and they're typically always have a huge workload. And for a small duplex a fourplex, triplex project, a drafter really could do that design following the IBC. So this provides that opportunity for small non-residential buildings or multifamily buildings under 3,000 square feet, having an occupant load of less than 20 people to be able to be designed by a non-registered design professional. As I mentioned, that's something I in the past, staff sought to implement immediately, but the direction was given to codify it before starting to follow it. So that's what we're doing with that section. Any questions?
So we're not gonna have the 3 architects from Yuba County next meeting?
Submit
Here.
every single triplex,
We're
fourplex
gonna
plan.
have them here, call to the public.
Correct, yeah, so there's, for every 3, like I said, there's only 3 architects and engineers, but there's dozens of draftsmen who can very well do these plans, but they currently cannot. Moving on to section 10. This is very similar to what the city of Yuma is doing right now. Section 10 is a subdivision ordinance, and this is a proposal to subdivisions containing less than 20 lots and tracts may bypass preliminary plat and go straight to final plat process. For example, the old Max subdivision, that was a 16 lot subdivision on a 4-acre piece of land. For something that small, everything that needs to be reviewed could theoretically be reviewed in one go, instead of doing preliminary plat, then final plat, paying 2 applications, separate hearings and whatnot. But this would be exclusively for subdivisions less than 20 lots. And it's just to be more flexible, more proactive in enticing growth and development.
Any questions or comments? Are we gonna be the only city allowing this?
No, Mayor, city of Yuma already allows this.
So until you advertise it.
But I believe the city of Yuma's, I don't know if their cutoff is 20, it might be 15. I'll double check, but if it's very similar for sure, I can tell you.
Any questions or comments?
We previously had a review session exactly in the same format with the Planning and Zoning Commission. And there is some feedback from the commission attached if you keep going, Andrea. So this is the feedback that I received from Planning and Zoning upon here delivering the same presentation. We had the meeting on July 15th, and Commissioner Ron Rice suggested creating separate definitions for fences and walls. Allow both, but specify the difference. For example, it was suggested that we should look into allowing wood fences, for example, and there would be a definition for fences. And then block walls is completely different than a fence. Also, just specifying, creating the definitions and creating regulations for both. That was one comment. And then there was another comment from Vivian, who is here tonight. She said, consider banning synthetic turf from usable open space, create synthetic turf definition to distinguish it from natural turf. So that was a suggestion that in our requirements for usable open space for parks, we say turf is an option. You may install turf, the developer may install turf, but it doesn't specify if that's natural turf or synthetic turf, which is apparently synthetic it's hot. It's hot, and you can get really a rug burn basically if the kids fall on it. So that was one suggestion from the commission as well, to require natural turf if you're going to classify it as usable open space, because synthetic turf is more for decoration instead of playing usable open space. And then another comment was to allow wood and other alternative materials as fencing materials. And then there are some examples provided down there. Andrea, if you keep going, such as these several types of fencing. They look nice, but that rock one is similar to what the clinic up there, Regional Center for Board of Health, has, the rock enclosure. But that was a feedback from the Planning and Zoning Commission. Any thoughts from council on anything covered in the presentation, or any comments by the Planning and Zoning Commission?
comments?
Mayor, if I may. I just want to let the mayor and council know that this is still an ongoing, so if something does come up or you do see something that you want to ask again, you can reach out to me. I can get in touch with Saul and provide those updates if there's something specific that maybe today didn't catch your eye, but that you wanted to address maybe in a different manner. So please let me know.
Yeah, one thing that we were talking before the meeting is that new regulation where they're gonna allow additional density in subdivisions. So maybe look further into it to see what if we're gonna be required or what are the at least to learn more, because I know there's other entities that are looking into how they're gonna accommodate that. And what I'm talking about, I think there's a new state allowing additional density in existing subdivisions where I'm not very familiar with it, but I heard the discussion on that, so.
We'll look into all the recent legislative changes, Mayor. There were a handful of them passed. None of them, Somerton isn't bound by any of them because we don't meet the population threshold.
Okay.
We've looked into it, but City of Yuma is also exempt because of their the base,
Yeah.
the military base. But they're being proactive and still looking at adopting some of those
Yeah.
requirements as a to entice affordable housing. So we can certainly look into those options and bring them back to council for your consideration at the next.
Yeah, it would be something to look at maybe for new development. For existing, that's different. You know, you buy up something expecting something and then they build a triplex and the next door, that would be more invasive. But if we can accommodate something with new development, maybe that's something that can be worked at.
And that is the way the conversation seems to be going.
No.
And for new development only, because like you said, the established neighborhoods, it's a shock. If you've lived there 20 years and then all of a sudden there's a fourplex going in the last empty lot that never got developed.
Yeah.
We can look into it, Mayor, for sure.
Okay.
And then also lastly, I want to update you that the update to the shade structures that we've also been discussing separately from this would also be incorporated into this update. So we're working on a separate presentation just because that was such a big item that it merits its own standalone presentation. But once we wrap that up, we will incorporate that as part of this update. That way we're not updating the code right after. But staff continues to work on that one as well, based on your direction.
Any other questions or comments? The 6:41 meeting's adjourned.
Thank you, Mayor, Council.